Okay, let's start the next session, and we have Sebastian Porst from Google on stage. And with that, Sebastian, over to you, and please welcome him.
Thank you very much. Right now it doesn't look quite successful because it shows the second desktop instead of the first desktop. So let's see what we could do there. I'm still not very successful here. Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today for my talk. I am Sebastian. I'm responsible for Google's Android malware detection effort, especially the parts that are supposed to keep Google Play clean from malware. I started out as a software engineer. Technically, I'm still a software engineer, but I get to spend a lot of time in meetings these days. My talk today is going to be a little bit about what we do to disrupt malware distribution and how we clean up devices, things like that. And I'm particularly going to focus on a family of Russian mobile banking phishing applications that we particularly focused on as a team in early 2015. Before I get into the good parts, I wanted to define a few terms, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the technologies that are available to Google or to our team to detect malware, to protect users, and so on. So those of you who are familiar with our 2015 report, or 2014 year in review report about Android security, you may have noticed that we usually don't talk about malware. We talk about PHA, potentially harmful applications. And the reason for this term is that it's actually different than malware. For our team's purpose, a PHA, a potentially harmful application, is something that can be harmful to the device or to the user, but it's not necessarily malware. For example, rooting applications that users voluntarily use to root their device, they are PHA, but they're not malware. But we still like to keep track of them because rooting applications tend to lower the device security, and so it's an important indicator of ecosystem safety that we keep track of those. On the other hand, many malware scanners detect potentially unwanted applications, click fraud applications, ad spam applications, and so on. As long as they don't have a privacy or security risk to users, our team does not care about that, so we don't consider them PHA. The second term I wanted to define is a hostile downloader. A hostile downloader is an application that has no bad functionality, except that it downloads and prompts for installation a PHA. So you can think of it as a first stage in a two-stage infection kind of scenario. The tools and capabilities that we have at Google for the Android security team have first been described in our Android Security 2014 year in review. If you haven't had the opportunity to check it out, I would encourage you to do that. It's quite interesting. And we put a lot of work into it. It's our initial report, and hopefully we'll be able to turn this into an annual thing. A brief recap for those of you who did not have the chance to take a look at that. On a very top-down view, our setup for detecting threats and protecting users is described on this slide. We, at Google, we have an Android application scanner that scans every application that we can get our hands on. This obviously includes applications that go into Google Play, but it also includes applications that we can get from any other source that we have integrated. We have pretty good coverage, so we believe that we have nearly all applications that are out in the wild in our database. And then we scan those every day, and these scans or the scan results are made available to users on their devices in the background using a technology that is called Safety Net. Safety Net is basically something that is installed in Google Play and Google Play services, and we use it to assess the state of device security, and then combined we assess the state of the ecosystem security of Android applications. We collect metrics like how many applications have PHA installed, no, sorry, how many devices have PHA installed, how many devices are rooted, and so on. And for this particular talk, there are two very interesting parts of verify apps, of safety net that are called verify apps. And the first one is we scan every application that a user installs at the time of installation. And we also repeat the scans of the device once a week to make sure that PHA that were installed for whatever reason continue to be scanned and users continue to be notified with warning dialogues that say things like, hey, we notice you have a phishing application installed. Are you sure you want to do that? And then users get a choice. They can say, yes, that's fine with me. And a surprising amount of people actually choose this option. We'll get to that later. And most users will say, no, please uninstall this application. I don't like this on my device. And so here's a chart that shows what Safety Net found out for Russian devices that sideloaded applications in 2015. So in late 2014, early 2015, about 8% of all Russian devices that use sideloaded applications had a PHA installed. And that's quite significant. It's a very large percentage. And that was one of the reasons why we focused in our device cleanup on Russia, specifically on one of those Russian bank phishing families that was quite widespread at the time. So the talk I'm going to give will explain two phases of our cleanup. And as a part of that cleanup, we saw the number of infected devices drop from around 5% to around 2.5% at the end. And it was quite interesting. Let me explain the actual phishing family that we dealt with, cleaned up, however you want to call it, before I get into what we did. So the phishing family itself is not particularly interesting. It has been publicly described by several security vendors in their blogs at this point. I suspect that it's also similar to that phishing family that was described in today's first talk. The phishing family targets banks, and when I heard in the first talk that it was monitoring the 900 number, it kind of reminded me of this particular family because the 900 number belongs to, I believe, a Sberbank, which is Russia's biggest bank and a prime target for Android phishing applications. The family was installed through social engineering. That mainly means people went to websites and downloaded things that were not as advertised. Very often those were pop-ups that said, hey, a security update is available, please download and install that. Your device is infected, please download and install this to clean it up. Or simply backdoored versions of popular applications where people believe they go to a third-party website, they download an application that is, let's say, Flash Player, but it isn't really Flash Player, it is Flash Player plus this phishing add-on. We've tracked this family since 2013, but it never rose to the point of importance of actually increasing our pressure on it, our cleanup pressure, because before early 2015, late 2014, the distribution of this network was not actually that wide, and we prioritized other threats at the time. Actually, it's 6 different phishing families that we dealt with in one cleanup. And the reason why we grouped all of them together is that they all had more or less the same behavior. There may be different versions of the same phishing family, one more advanced than the other, or maybe that's just collaboration between the teams or the malware authors that created them. Maybe they were just random coincidences of parallel development. For all relevant purposes, they can be thought of as one family. So what does it actually do? On the screenshot to the right, you can see what it looks like for one particular phishing situation. And that particular phishing situation pops up when the user has the phishing Trojan installed and also has the legitimate Sberbank application installed. The user then wants to use the legitimate Sberbank application. They click on the icon and the Sberbank application starts, but then the phishing Trojan notices that the legitimate application is starting, and then they pop up their own activity immediately, and it will gain focus in the foreground. And it looks like this on that login dialog on the screenshot. And curiously, that login dialog of the phishing application looks more professional than the login dialog of the legit Sberbank. And that's quite curious, because the graphic designers of this particular phishing family are really good. In other situations, for example, when the user opens a legitimate Google Play applications, what's shown is not a new activity, but rather one of those semi-transparent dialogues that were added in a recent version of Android that's also, for example, used by Facebook for the chat bubbles. So if the user opens Google Play, they see the semi-transparent dialog, and it asks you to enter your credit card information to allow purchases on Google Play. And obviously, that's not a legitimate dialog, rather the phished credentials or the phished credit card number goes straight to the bad guys. And also for that phishing dialog that is shown over Google Play, it's like super professional. It looks exactly like the UI style of Google Play. It has very nice UI behavior where it automatically, when you start entering your number, it grays out the credit card logos. That is not it. So if you enter a Visa number, it only highlights the Visa icon and so on. So it's like super credible. And I would have thought it could have been a legit dialogue if I didn't work at Google and not in this field. Another thing these phishing applications do is that they abuse device administrator permissions to stay persistent on devices, to make it more difficult for users to uninstall applications. And that's a common trick that's very commonly used by all kinds of potentially harmful applications these days. It's not limited to phishing. It's also, for example, very popular in ransomware applications and so on. And the way it works is that a device administrator is registered dynamically. So if the application starts, they can pop up a dialog that says, hey, we need these additional permissions to do, for example, reset your password, remotely wipe your device, and so on. Do you want to grant these permissions, yes or no? And once the permissions have been granted, these device administrators can also listen on when they are about to be disabled, and by receiving a broadcast message. And so they receive this broadcast message when they are about to be disabled, and then a malicious actor, a malicious application, can simply do something that intercepts that removal process. For example, they can just turn off the device screen. They can just pop up their own activity that basically stops the user's settings clicks and prevents the user from disabling the device administrator permissions. And as long as device administrator permissions are active, the application cannot be uninstalled, and so they gain persistence on the device. That particular family was both web-based and SMS-based, meaning they had these kinds of CNC servers available for their communication, for the data exfiltration, and so on. So before the first cleanup phase, the number of installations / the distribution of this family kind of looked like this. We've been tracking it since late 2013. It was never widely distributed until around December 2014, when apparently there was some kind of push by the malware authors to get this phishing application or these phishing applications out to a wider audience. And that's about the time when we stepped in. User protection before the first cleanup phase kind of looked as it does for all kinds of families that we don't particularly focus on. So in the red line, you can see warnings that are shown by our safety net technology at a time that they either install an application or the application is already installed and then it warns you again that how should I call it color, light blue, aqua, whatever, that's around the red line that shows the number of installations that we should have warned about, but we didn't because at the time we didn't know that these were phishing applications. Then there's also a dark blue line that's close to the very bottom of this chart. And the dark blue line shows the number of users who saw the warning but ignored it, and they're fine with phishing applications on their phone. That's quite low here. That's good. And then there's also the number of applications that we remotely remove from devices in order to clean up the ecosystem. And they're 0 at this point because we didn't do anything to remotely remove those applications. So in early 2015, we started creating all this technology that allows us to clean up devices and to improve user warnings and so on. And when the first phase of that new technology went live between March 12th and March 29th. The technical changes we made is that at the very first step, we did a sanity check with a Russian language speaker to make sure that the warnings that we show are actually understandable by a wide audience of native Russian speakers. Because at the time, we still saw about 15% of users that when we warned them specifically, this application is going to steal your bank credentials, do you really want to install that? 15% said yes, and it was a surprising result. But it turned out, according to the native speaker we asked, at least our string should be understandable, so the reasons for why people go through with the installation is unrelated to our messaging. Another thing we did is we cranked up the daily warnings, the weekly warnings for Russia specifically, from once a week to once a day. At the time, we were kind of afraid that people would just disable the whole verify apps technology in their settings because we would nag them too often about applications they have installed. Okay, so since we didn't disrupt any distribution channels and we didn't go after any domains or whatever, there was no real change in attempts after the first phase went live. So that was expected. We only warned users more often than before. And that can be seen in this chart. It's the same color scheme that I've already mentioned. The red line shows the number of daily warnings we showed. That goes up 6 times because we moved from warning once a week to warning once a day. And we saw a little bit of users now starting to ignore our warnings. The dark blue line is going up at the end. But luckily, even though users that ignored our warning did not actually go into the system settings and disabled the whole verify apps feature at a broad scale. So we were very happy about that because the negative effects on Android, the safety of the Android ecosystem did not outweigh the gains that we made here. So first lessons we learned, scanning more devices more frequently works. If we warn users once a day, at least those people that will agree to uninstall the application will more likely to do it. And only a small percentage of users really disabled all the warnings. And that's good. And so we could move into the second phase. And the second phase was the really important one. The second phase is when we started to disrupt the distribution network of this phishing family. Started March 30th, continued until June 10th. And the technical changes we made at the time is that our technology in verify apps allows us to choose between warning users and giving them a choice if they want to install it, and just telling them you're not allowed to install this on your device. This is too dangerous. We don't allow it. And If the application is already installed, instead of warning the user that we recommend they uninstall the application, we just do it for them and tell them this application was too dangerous, we removed it from your device. And at that time, we also decided to not just go after the phishing applications themselves, but also against the hostile downloaders that were used as a main distribution channel for these applications. And so we remotely uninstalled these hostile downloaders. We never were sure if those hostile downloaders actually were created by the same people as the phishing applications, but we wanted to send a message that says, if your advertising, application distribution network, whatever, is complicit in distributing potentially harmful applications, then we will go after your distribution network too, and we will try to get it off devices as much as possible. We also recognized at the time that we did not have the capabilities to actually remotely remove device administrator applications. So, especially not the kind that intercepted these broadcast messages and tried to block removal. So we had to use an ancient technology that we had in Android open source project for years, but we never used before, and it's called the intent firewall. And the intent firewall can basically isolate applications from broadcasts that are sent by the system. And so these device administrator phishing applications, they are blocked from receiving the broadcast message that said, hey, you're about to be disabled. And so they couldn't start their counter code to fight that disabling. And that worked really well. And so we had the ability to remotely remove these applications. And that's what the PHA installation attempts after second phase looked like. We disrupted those hostile downloader distribution network, and we saw a strong drop in number of installation attempts that happened after we removed all those hostile downloaders from devices. And at this point, continuing on from here, we basically saw a very strong reduction of distribution installation attempts. Here's what the user protection looks like. Instead of the red line where we show warnings, the yellow line goes up. We don't show warnings anymore. We just don't allow the user to install applications. We remotely remove applications. And there was an obvious spike at the beginning of the second phase because all the devices had these bad apps installed. So they had to be removed first, and then later on, as the weeks went by, the number of remotely removed applications went down because they were just not that widespread anymore. During that effort, we managed to reduce infection rates for this particular family by about 80%. And the lessons we learned is that remotely cleaning up devices has a much bigger impact for the health and safety of our Android ecosystem, and that the device administrator is just too powerful. It can block users from taking their own action, from removing applications that they want to remove after they've gained this abusive persistent mode. And so we may have to think about how we are moving forward with the device administrator. The number one lesson, as usual, is that AV in any way is only a last-ditch effort. And it can be used to protect users, but it should not be what people rely on. Rather, we want to make sure that Android as a system is hardened in the future to prevent these kinds of abuse. So for example, what we already did, I'm not sure if it was actually Android M, I think we already did it in the versions that we released before, is that regular applications can no longer use get running tasks to figure out what application is starting, what application is running, so they cannot use that API to time when they show up their phishing dialog for credentials phishing. We made a change in the Android Marshmallow, which is 6.0, that the drawing over other windows, there needs to be very explicitly opted in by users in the settings, and not just any arbitrary apps that request that permission can draw over other applications. So we try to shut down this vector of potential user confusion. And then we also believe that the runtime permissions that we added in Android M, especially those around SMS sending, make it more difficult for applications to use SMS as CNC servers. Now, every time an SMS is sent, at least for the first time until the user agrees that an application should always send SMS, there's a pop-up dialog that says, hey, do you really want that application to send SMS? And usually users say no if they don't expect the SMS to be sent. We also made a couple of improvements to Safety Net, which is the on-device technology. We have the ability to do daily scans for at-risk locales. Russia and this phishing campaign was only the first campaign that we're targeting. We're now already working on a second campaign that we want to remotely clean up because they're very dangerous. We have the ability to target the blocks instead of warnings by locale. We want to continue to use the intent firewall to isolate applications from system messages, system notifications, and so on, so we can remove them. And we have the ability to remotely uninstall device administrators. Yeah, the lessons we learned: cleaning up after the bad guys is a full-time job, requires a dedicated full-time team. Unfortunately, we don't have this yet. If you're interested about that, talk to me. The bad guys did not adapt fast enough to escape the cleanup. We made very sure that we, at the first stage, at the beginning of the first stage, at the beginning of the second stage, we had all the things in place that we wanted to execute at the time. So we tried to give the bad guys basically zero time, or as little time as possible, to understand that they're being removed from devices and that they're about to lose the distribution network. The best thing was that that was the first time we did a cleanup like that, and we had our metrics dashboards, the screenshots you saw in the presentation, and our team was able to demonstrate a sustainably lower abuse rate in a way that we had predicted, especially after the second phase. And unfortunately, there will always be a surprisingly high percentage, 10, 15% of users who just ignore all warnings. And we have to take that as a little bit of a baseline of the state of device security or ecosystem security.